It was indeed a garden, like a lot of other gardens you got in areas like Clay Lane. The grey soil was nothing more than old brick dust, elderly cat mess and generalised semi-rotted dross. At the far end was a 3-hole privy. They were built handily by the gate to the back lane, so the night soil men didn't have far to go. But this one had a small stone cylinder turning gently beside it. The garden didn't get much proper light. Gardens like this never did. You got second-hand light, once the richer folk in the taller buildings had finished with it. Some people kept pigeons or rabbits or pigs on their plots, or planted, against all experience, a few vegetables. But it'd take magic beans to reach the real sunlight in gardens like this. Nevertheless, someone had made an effort. Most of the spare ground had been covered with gravel of different sizes, and this had been carefully raked into swirls and curves. Here and there, apparently with great thought, some individual larger stones had been positioned. Vimes stared at the garden of rocks, desperate for anything to occupy his attention. He could see what the designer had in mind, he thought, but the effect had been spoiled. This was the big city, after all. Garbage got everywhere. The main disposal method was throwing it over a wall. Sooner or later, someone would sell it on or possibly eat it. A young monk was carefully raking the gravel. He gave a respectful bow as Sweeper approached. The old man sat down on a stone bench. "Push off and get us 2 cups of tea, lad, will you?" he said. "1 green with yak butter, and Mr. Vimes will have it boiled orange in a builder's boot with 2 sugars and yesterday's milk, right?" "That's how I like it," said Vimes weakly, sitting down. Sweeper took a deep, long breath. "And I like building gardens," he said. "Life should be a garden." Vimes stared blankly at what was in front of them. "Okay," he said. "The gravel and rocks, yeah, I could see that. Shame about all the rubbish. It always turns up, doesn't it?" "Yes," said Lutze. "It's part of the pattern." "What? The old cigarette packet?" "Certainly. That invokes the element of air," said Sweeper. "And the cat doings?" "To remind us that disharmony, like a cat, gets everywhere." "The cabbage stalks? The used Sonky?" Named after Wallace Sonky, a man without whose experiments with thin rubber the housing pressure in Ankh-Morpork would have been a good deal more pressing. "At our peril, we forget the role of the organic in the total harmony. What arrives, seemingly by chance, in the pattern is part of the higher organisation that we can only dimly comprehend. This is a very important fact, and has a bearing on your case." "And the beer bottle?" For the first time since Vimes had met him, the monk frowned. "You know, some bugger always tosses one over the wall on his way back from the pub on Friday nights. If it wasn't forbidden to do that kind of thing, he'd feel the flat to my hand, and no mistake." "It's not part of the higher organisation?" "Possibly. Who cares? That sort of thing gets on my thungers. It really does," said Sweeper. He sat back with his hands on his knees. Serenity flowed once more. "Well, now, Mr. Vimes, you know the universe is made up of very small items." "Huh?" "We've got to work up to things gradually, Mr. Vimes. You're a bright man. I can't keep telling you everything is done by magic." "Am I really here too? In the city? I mean, a younger me?" "Of course. Why not?" Where was I? Oh, yes. "Made up of very small items, and this is not a good time to be in the watch, I remember. There's the curfew, and that was only the start." "Small items, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper sharply. "You need to know this." "Oh, all right. How small?" "Very, very small. So tiny that they have some very strange ways indeed." Vimes sighed. "And I ask you, what ways are these, yeah?" "I'm glad you asked that question. For one thing, they can be in many places at once. Try to think, Mr. Vimes." Vimes tried to concentrate on what was probably the discarded fish and chip wrapper of infinity. Oddly enough, with so many horrible thoughts crowding his head, it was almost a relief to put them on one side in order to consider this. The brain did things like that. He remembered once when he'd been stabbed and would have bled to death if Sergeant Angua hadn't caught up with him, and how as he lay there he'd found himself taking a very intense interest in the pattern of the carpet. The senses say, "We've only got a few minutes. Let's record everything, in every detail." "That can't be right," he said. "If this seat is made up of lots of tiny things that can be in lots of places at once, why is it standing still?" "Give the man a small cigar," said Sweeper jubilantly. "That's the big problem, Mr. Vimes, and the answer, our abbot tells us, is that it is in lots of places at once. Here's the tea. And in order for it to be in lots of places at once, the multiverse is made up of a vast number of alternative universes, an oodleplex of oodleplexes. That's like the biggest number anyone can think of, ever, just so as it can accommodate all the quantum. Am I going too fast for you?" "Oh, that," said Vimes. "I know all about that. Like, you make a decision in this universe, and you made a different decision in another one. I heard the wizards talking about that at a posh reception once. They were arguing about the glorious 25th of May. And what were they saying? Oh, all the old stuff. That it would have turned out different if the rebels had properly guarded the gates and the bridges, and that you can't break a siege by a frontal attack. But they were saying that, in a way, everything happened somewhere. And you'll believe them. It sounds like complete thungers, but sometimes you can't help wondering, what would have happened if I'd done something different? Like when you killed your wife?" Sweeper was impressed at Vimes's lack of reaction. "This is a test, right? You're a quick student, Mr. Vimes. But in some other universe, believe me, I hauled you off and punched you one." Again, Sweeper smiled the annoying little smile that suggested he didn't believe him. "You haven't killed your wife," he said, "anywhere. There is nowhere, however huge the multiverse is, where Sam Vimes, as he is now, has murdered Lady Sybil. But the theory is quite clear. It says that if anything could happen without breaking any physical laws, it must happen. But it hasn't. And yet, the many universes theory works. Without it, no one would ever be able to make a decision at all." So what people do matters," said Sweeper. "People invent other laws. What they do is important. The abbot's very excited about this. He nearly swallowed his rusk. It means the multiverse isn't infinite, and people's choices are far more vital than they think. They can, by what they do, change the universe." Sweeper gave Vimes a long look. "Mr. Vimes, you're thinking, I'm back in time, and damn me, I'm probably going to end up being the sergeant that teaches me all I know, right?" "I've been wondering. The Watch would offer any gutter trash a job in those days, because of the curfew and all the spying, but look, I remember Keel, and yes, he did have a scar and an eye patch, but I'm sure as hell that he wasn't me." "Right. The universe doesn't work like that. You were indeed taken under the wing of one John Keel, a watchman from Pseudopolis, who came to Ankh-Morpork because the pay was better. He was a real person. He was not you. But do you remember if he ever mentions to you that he was attacked by two men not long after he got off the coach?" "Hell, yes," said Vimes. "The muggers. He got his scar that way. A good old Ankh-Morpork welcome, but he was a tough man, took them both down, no problem." "This time there were three," said Sweeper. "Well, three's trickier, of course, but—" "You're the policeman. You guessed the name of the third man, Mr. Vimes." Vimes hardly had to think. The answer erupted from the depths of his darkest suspicion. "Casa!" "He soon settled in, yes. The bastard was in the next cell. He even told me he'd grabbed some money." "And you're both stuck here, Mr. Vimes. This isn't your past any more. Not exactly. It's a past." And up there is a future. It might be your future, but it might not be. You want to go home now, leaving Casa here and the real John Keel dead? But there'll be no home to go to if you could do that, because young Sam Vimes wouldn't get a swift course in basic policing from a decent man if you did. He'll learn it from people like Sergeant Knock and Corporal Quirk and Constable Colon, and that might not be the worst of it by a long way. Vimes shut his eyes. He remembered how wet behind the ears he'd been. And Fred Colon hadn't been too bad, under the half-hearted timorousness and lack of imagination. But Quirk had been an evil little sod in his way, and as for Knock, well, Knock had been Fred's teacher, and the pupil wasn't a patch on the master. What had Sam Vimes learned from Keel? To stay alert, to think for himself, to keep a place in his head free from the Quirks and Knocks of the world, and not to hesitate about fighting dirty today if that was what it took to fight again tomorrow. He'd often thought he'd have been dead long ago if it wasn't for... He looked up sharply at the monk. "Can't tell you that, Mr. Vimes," said Lutze. "Nothing's certain 'cause of quantum." "But look, I know my future happened because I was there." "No. What we've got here, friend, is quantum interference. Mean anything? No. Well, let me put it this way. There's one past and one future, but there are two presents. One where you and your evil friend turned up, and one where you didn't. We can keep those two presents going side by side for a few days. It takes a lot of run time, but we can do it. And then they'll snap back together. The future that happens depends on you. We want the future where Vimes is a good copper, not the other one." "But it must have happened," snapped Vimes. "I told you, I can remember it. I was there yesterday." "Nice try, but that doesn't mean anything anymore," said the monk. "Trust me. Yes, it's happened to you, but even though it has, it might not, 'cause of quantum. Right now, there isn't a Commander Vimes-shaped hole in the future to drop you into. It's officially uncertain. But it might not be, if you do it right. You owe it to yourself, Commander. Right now, out there, Sam Vimes is learning to be a very bad copper indeed, and he learns fast." The little monk stood up. "I'll let you think about that," he said. Vimes nodded, staring at the gravel garden. Sweeper crept away quietly and went back into the temple. He walked to the other side of the office. He removed a strange-shaped key from around his neck and inserted it into a small door. The door opened. Brilliant sunlight burst ahead of him. He walked on, his sandals leaving the cold flagstones and walking onto well-trodden earth in broad, hot daylight. The river had a different course this far back in the past, and present-day residents of Ankh-Morpork would have been surprised at how pleasant it looked 700,000 years ago. Hippos sunbathed on a sandbank out in midstream and, according to Q, were getting troublesome lately. He'd had to set up a little temporal fence around the camp at nights, so that any hippo trying to wander in among the tents found themselves back in the water with a headache. Q himself, his straw hat protecting his head from the hot sun, was supervising his assistants in a vined-off area. Lutze sighed as he walked towards it. There were going to be explosions. He knew it. It wasn't that he disliked Q, the Order's master of devices. The man was a sort of engineering equivalent of the Abbot. The Abbot had taken 1,000-year-old ideas and put them through his mind in a new way, and as a result the multiverse had opened for him like a flower. Q, on the other hand, had taken the ancient technology of the procrastinators that could save and restore time, and had harnessed it to practical, everyday purposes, such as, yes, blowing people's heads off. It was something that Lutze tried to avoid. There were better things to do with people's heads. As Lutze approached, a line of joyful, dancing monks wove their way along a bamboo replica of a street, letting off firecrackers and banging gongs. As they reached the corner, the last monk turned and lightly tossed a little drum into the outstretched arms of a straw dummy. The air shimmered, and the figure disappeared with a small thunderclap. "Nice to see something not blowing anyone's head off," said Lutze, leaning on a vine rope. "Oh, hello, Sweeper," said Q. "Yes, I wonder what went wrong. You see, the body should have moved forward by a microsecond and left the head where it was." He picked up a megaphone. "Thank you, everyone. Places for another run. Soto, take over, please." He turned to Lutze. "Well, he is thinking about it," said the Sweeper. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Lutze. This is completely unauthorized, you know. We're supposed to prune out rogue history loops, not expend vast amounts of time keeping them going. This one's important. We owe it to the man. It wasn't his fault we had the major temporal shattering just as he fell through the dome." "Two timelines running side by side," moaned Q. "That's quite unacceptable, you know. I'm having to use techniques that are completely untried." "Yes, but it's only a few days." "What about Vimes? Is he strong enough? He's got no training for this." "He defaults to being a copper. A copper's a copper wherever he is." "I really don't know why I listen to you, Lucy. I really don't," said Q. He glanced up at the arena and hurriedly raised his megaphone to his lips. "Don't hold it that way up! I said don't!" There was a thunderclap. Lutze didn't bother to look round. Q lifted the megaphone again and said wearily, "All right, someone please go and fetch Brother Kai, will you? Start looking around, 2 centuries ago. You don't even use these very useful devices I devise," he added to Lutze. "I don't need to," said Lutze. "Got a brain. Anyway, I use the temporal toilet, don't I?" "A privy which discharges 10 million years into the past was not a good idea, Sweeper. I'm sorry I let you persuade me." "It's saving us 4p a week to Harry King's bucket boys, Q, and that's not to be sneezed at. Is it not written, 'A penny saved is a penny earned'? Besides, it all lands in a volcano anyway, perfectly hygienic." There was another explosion. Q turned and raised his megaphone. "Do not bang the tambourine more than twice," he bellowed. "It's tap, tap, throw, duck. Please pay attention." He turned back to the Sweeper. 4 more days at most, Lutze," he said. "I'm sorry, but after that I can't hide it in the paperwork. And I'll be amazed if your man can stand it. It'll affect his mind sooner or later, however tough you think he is. He's not in his right time." "We're learning a lot, though," Lutze insisted. "For a perfectly logical chain of reasons, Vimes ended up back in time even looking rather like Keel, eye patch and scar. Is that narrative causality, or historical imperative, or just plain weird? Are we back to the old theory of the self-correcting history? Is there no such thing as an accident, as the abbot says? Is every accident just a higher-order design? I'd love to find out." 4 days, Q insisted. "Any longer than that, and this little exercise will show up, and the abbot will be very, very annoyed with us." "Right you are, Q," said the Sweeper meekly. He'll be annoyed if he has to find out, certainly, he thought as he walked back to the door in the air. He'd been very specific. The abbot of the history monks, the men in saffron, no such monastery, they had many names, couldn't allow this sort of thing, and he'd taken pains to forbid Lutze from this course of action. He had added, "But when you know, I expect historical imperative will win." Sweeper went back to the garden and found Vimes still staring at the empty baked bean tin of universal oneness. "Well, Commander," he said, "are you really like policeman for time?" said Vimes. "Well, in a way," said Sweeper. "So you make sure the good stuff happens?" "No, not the good stuff. The right stuff," said Sweeper. "But frankly, these days, we have our work cut out making sure anything happens. We used to think time was like a river. You could row up and down and come back to the same place. Then we found it acted like a sea, so you could go from side to side as well. Then it turned out to be like a ball of water. You could go up and down too. Currently we think it's like, lots of spaces all rolled up. And then there's time jumps and time slips, and humans mess it up too, wasting it and gaining it. And then there's quantum, of course. The monk sighed. There's always bloody quantum. So, what with one thing and another, we think we're doing well if yesterday happens before tomorrow, quite frankly. You, Mr. Vimes, got caught up in a bit of an event. We can't put it right, not properly. You can. Vimes sat back. I've got no choice, have I? He said. As my old sergeant used to say, you do the job that's in front of you. He hesitated. But that's going to be me, isn't it? I taught me all I know. No, I explained. I didn't understand it, but perhaps I don't have to. Sweeper sat down. Good. And now, Mr. Vimes, I'll take you back inside and we'll work out what you need to know from all this, and Q will set up the spinners and we'll just bounce you in time a little so that you give yourself the message. You know you did it because you saw it. We can't have you running around knowing all about us. I'll get suspicious. You'll have to make it convincing. I'll still be suspicious. You won't trust even yourself? I'm a devious character. I could be hiding something. How are you going to get me back to the old watch house? Don't even think about giving me some kind of potion. No, well, blindfold you, twirl you around, take you the long way and walk you back, I promise. Any other advice? Said Vimes gloomily. Just be yourself, said Sweeper. See it through. There'll come a time when you'll look back and see how it all made sense. Really. I wouldn't lie. It'll be a perfect moment, believe me. But, Vimes hesitated. Yes? You must know there's another little problem if I'm going to be Sergeant Keel. I've remembered what day this is, and I know what's going to happen. Yes, I know too. Shall we talk about that? Captain Tilden blinked. What happened there? He said. Where? Said Vimes, trying to fight down nausea. Time coming back had felt like being squeezed just for a moment in a giant vice. You blurred man. Perhaps I'm a bit tired of this, said Vimes. Listen, Captain, I am John Keel. I can prove it, okay? Ask me some questions. You've got my papers there, haven't you? Tilden hesitated for a moment. He was a man whose mind was ponderous enough to have momentum. It was quite hard for his thoughts to change direction. Who is commander of the Pseudopolis Watch, then? He said. Sheriff Macklewheat, said Vimes. Ah, wrong. Fallen at the very first fence, what? In fact, you fool, it's Sheriff Purley. Excuse me, sir, said Snouty nervously. Yes, what? It is Macklewheat, sir. Purley died last week. Heard it in the pub. Fell into the river when drunk, said Vimes helpfully. That's what I heard, sir, said Snouty. Tilden looked furious. You could have known that, what? He said. It doesn't prove anything. Ask me something else, then, said Vimes. Ask me what Macklewheat said about me. I just hope I've got the answers right. Well, said I was the best officer on his force and he was sorry to see me go, said Vimes. Said I was of good character. Said he wished he could pay me the $25 a month I was going to get here. I never offered you. No, you offered me $20, and now that I've seen the mess here, I'm not taking it, Vimes rejoiced. Tilden hadn't even learned how to control a conversation. If you pay Nock $20, he owes you $19 change. The man couldn't talk and chew gum at the same time. Oh, look at this, will you? Vimes dumped his handcuffs on the desk. The gaze of Snouty and Tilden swung to them as if magnetic. Oh dear, thought Vimes, and stood up and lifted the crossbow out of Snouty's hands. It was all in the movement. If you moved with authority, you got a second or two extra. Authority was everything. He fired the bow at the floor and then handed it back. A kid could open those cuffs, and, while Snouty here keeps a very clean jail, he's completely draws at being a guard, said Vimes. This place needs shaken up. He leaned forward, knuckles on the captain's desk, and his face a few inches from the trembling moustache and the milky eyes. $25, or I walk out that door, he said. It was probably a phrase never ever said before by any prisoner anywhere on any world. $25, murmured Tilden, hypnotised. And the rank will be Sergeant at Arms, said Vimes. Not Sergeant. I'm not going to be given orders by the likes of Nock. Sergeant at Arms, said Tilden distantly. But Vimes saw the hint of approval. It was a good, military-sounding title, and it was still on the books. In fact, it was a pretty ancient pre-coppering term, back in the days when a court employed a big man with a stick to drag miscreants in front of it. Vimes had always admired the simplicity of that arrangement. Well, Sheriff McElwheat certainly gave you a most glowing reference, said the captain, shuffling the papers. Very glowing. Things have been a little difficult since we lost Sergeant and I'll be paid my first month in advance, please. I need clothes and a decent meal and somewhere to sleep. Tilden cleared his throat. Many of the unmarried men stay in the barracks in Cheapside. Not me, said Vimes. I'll be lodging with Dr. Lorne in Twinkle Street. Well, Rosy Palm did suggest he had a spare room. Pox, doctor, said Snouty. Yeah, I'm particular about the company I keep, said Vimes. It's also just around the corner. He took his hands off the desk, stood back and whipped off a salute of almost parodic efficiency, the sort that Tilden had always loved. I'll report for duty at 3 o'clock this afternoon, sir, he said. Thank you, sir. Tilden sat mesmerised. It was $25, sir, I believe, said Vimes, still maintaining the salute. He watched the captain get up and go to the old green safe in the corner. The man was careful not to let Vimes see him turn the dial, but Vimes was pretty certain he didn't need to. The safe had still been there when he made captain, and by then everyone knew the combination was 4478, and that no one seemed to know how to change it. The only things worth keeping in it had been the tea and sugar and anything you particularly wanted Nobby to read. Tilden came back with a small leather bag and slowly counted out the money, and was so cowed that he didn't ask Vimes to sign anything. Vimes took it, saluted again, and held out his other hand. Badge, sir, he said. Oh yes, of course. The captain, entirely unnerved, fumbled in the top drawer of the desk and pulled out a dull copper shield. If he'd been that observant, he'd have noticed how hungrily Vimes's eyes watched it. The new sergeant-at-arms picked up his badge with care and saluted yet again. Oath, sir, he said. Oh, that thing, I believe I've got it written down somewhere. Vimes took a deep breath. This probably wasn't a good idea, but he was flying now. I, square bracket, recruit's name, square bracket, do solemnly swear by, square bracket, recruit's deity of choice, square bracket, to uphold the laws and ordinances of the city of Ankh-Morpork, serve the public trust, and defend the subjects of his/her, bracket, delete, whichever is inappropriate, bracket, majesty, bracket, name of reigning monarch, bracket, without fear, favour, or thought of personal safety, to pursue evildoers and protect the innocent, laying down my life, if necessary, in the cause of said duty, so help me, bracket, aforesaid deity, bracket, full stop, gods save the king/queen, bracket, delete, whichever is inappropriate, bracket, full stop. My word! Well done, said Tilden. You have come well prepared, Sergeant. And now it's the King's shilling, sir, said Vimes insistently, soaring on wings of audacity. What? I have to take the King's shilling, sir. Do we have a... It's in the bottom drawer, sir, said Snouty helpfully, on the bit of string. Oh, yes, said Tilden, beaming. It's a long time since we used that, what? Is it? Said Vimes. After some rummaging, Tilden produced the coin. It was a genuine old shilling, probably worth $50 now for just its silver, and thus, coppers being coppers, it had always been dropped into the new copper's hand and then tugged away before it was pinched. Vimes had taken the oath once. He wondered if taking it twice cancelled it out. But it needed to be done, and you had at least to touch the shilling. He felt the weight in his palm and took a small, shameful pleasure in closing his fingers on it before the captain had time to drag it back. Then, point made, he released his grip. With a final salute, he turned and tapped Snouty on the shoulder. With the captain's permission, I'd like a chat with you outside, please. And Vimes strode out. Snouty looked at Tilden, who was still sitting as though hypnotised, the shilling dangling from his fist. The captain managed to say, Good man, that. Very good. Got backbone. I'll just go and see what he wants, sir, said Snouty, and scuttled out. He had reached the end of the corridor when a hand came out of the shadows and pulled him close. "You're a useful man to know, Snouty," hissed Vimes. "I can tell." "Yes, sir," said Snouty, held half on tiptoe. "You've got your ear to the ground, eh?" "Yes, sir." "There's someone in every nick who knows all that's going on and can lay his hands on just about anything, Snouty, and I think you are that man." "Yes, sir." "Then listen here," said Vimes. "Size 8 boots, size 7 1/4 helmet, a good leather cape. The boots should be a good make, but second-hand. Got that?" "Second-hand?" "Yes, soles pretty nearly worn through." "Soles pretty nearly worn through. Check," said Snouty. "Breastplate, not to have any rust on it, but a few dents will be okay. A good sword, Snouty, and believe me, I know a good sword when I hold one. As for all the rest of the stuff, well, I know a man like you can get hold of the very best and have it delivered to Dr. Lawn's place in Twinkle Street by 10 this morning. And there'll be something in it for you, Snouty." "What will that be, sir?" said Snouty, who was finding the grip uncomfortable. "My undying friendship, Snouty," said Vimes, "which is going to be an extremely rare coin in these parts, let me tell you." "Right you are, Sarge," said Snouty. "And will you be wanting a bell, sir?" "A bell?" "For ringing and shouting. All's well with, Sarge." Vimes considered this. A bell. Well, every copper still got a bell. It was down there in regulations. But Vimes had banned its use on anything but ceremonial occasions. "No bell for me, Snouty," said Vimes. "Do you think things are well?" Snouty swallowed. "Could go either way, Sarge," he managed. "Good man. See you this afternoon." There was a glow of dawn in the sky when Vimes strode out, but the city was still a pattern of shadows. In his pocket was the reassuring heaviness of the badge, and in his mind the huge, huge freedom of the oath. Ruler after ruler had failed to notice what a devious oath it was. He walked as steadily as he could down to Twinkle Street. A couple of watchmen tried to waylay him, but he showed them the badge, and more importantly, he had the voice now. It had come back to him. It was night, and he was walking the streets, and he owned the damn streets, and somehow that came out in the way he spoke. They'd hurried off. He wasn't sure they'd believed him, but at least they'd pretended to. The voice had told them he could be the kind of trouble they weren't paid enough to deal with. At one point, he had to step aside as a very thin horse dragged a huge and familiar four-wheeled wagon over the cobbles. Frightened faces looked out at him from between the wide metal strips that covered most of it, and then it disappeared into the gloom. Curfew was claiming its nightly harvest. These were not good times. Everyone knew Lord Winder was insane, and then some kid who was equally mad had tried to knock him off, and would have done too if the man hadn't moved at the wrong moment. His lordship had taken the arrow in the arm, and they said, they being the nameless people of the kind that everyone met in the pub, that the wound had poisoned him and made him worse. He suspected everyone and everything. He saw dark assassins in every corner. The rumour was that he woke up sweating every night because they even got into his dreams. And he saw plots and spies everywhere throughout his waking hours, and had men root them out. And the thing about rooting out plots and spies everywhere is that, even if there are no real plots to begin with, there are plots and spies galore very soon. At least the Night Watch didn't have to do much of the actual rooting. They just arrested the pieces. It was the special office in Cable Street that was the long hand of his lordship's paranoia. The particulars, they were officially, but as far as Vimes could remember, they'd revelled in their nickname of the Unmentionables. They were the ones that listened in every shadow and watched at every window. That was how it seemed, anyway. They certainly were the ones who knocked on doors in the middle of the night. Vimes stopped in the dark. The cheap clothes were soaked through, the boots were flooded, rain was trickling off his chin, and he was a long, long way from home. Yet, in a treacherous kind of way, this was home. He'd spent most of his days working nights. Walking through the wet streets of a sleeping city was his life. The nature of the night changed, but the nature of the beast remained the same. He reached into the ragged pocket and touched the badge again. In the darkness, where lamps were few and far between, Vimes knocked on a door. A light was burning in one of the lower windows, so Lorne was presumably still awake. After a while, a very small panel slid back, and he heard a voice say, "Oh, it's you." There was a pause, followed by the sound of bolts being released. The doctor opened the door. In one hand he held a very long syringe. Vimes found his gaze inexorably drawn to it. A bead of something purple dripped off the end and splashed onto the floor. "What would you have done? Inject me to death?" he said. "This?" Lorne looked at the instrument as if unaware he'd been holding it. "Oh, just sorting out a little problem for someone. Patients turn up at all hours." "I'll bet they do." Rosie said you had a spare room," said Vimes. "I can pay," he added quickly. "I've got a job. $5 a month? I won't be needing it for long." "Upstairs on the left," said Lorne, nodding. "We can talk about it in the morning." "I'm not a criminal madman," said Vimes. He wondered why he said it, and then wondered who he was trying to reassure. "Never mind, I'm sure you'll soon fit in," said Lorne. There was a whimper from the door leading to the surgery. "The bed's not aired, but I doubt that you'll care," he said. "And now, if you'll excuse me." It wasn't aired, and Vimes didn't care. He didn't even remember getting into it. He woke up once in panic and heard the sound of the big black wagon rattling down the street, and then it just, quite seamlessly, became part of the nightmare. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Vimes found a cold cup of tea by his bed and a pile of clothes and armour on the floor outside the door. He drank the tea while he inspected the pile. He'd read Snouty right. The man survived because he was a weathercock and kept an eye on which way the wind was blowing, and right now the wind was blowing due Vimes. He'd even included fresh socks and drawers, which hadn't been in the specification. It was a thoughtful touch. They probably hadn't been paid for, of course. They had been obtained. This was the old night watch. But glory be, the breathy little crawler had scrounged something else too. The 3 stripes for a sergeant had a little gold crown above them. Vimes instinctively disliked crowns, but this one he was prepared to treasure. He went downstairs doing up his belt and bumped into Lorne coming out of his surgery, wiping his hands on a cloth. The doctor smiled absently, then focused on the uniform. The smile did not so much fade as drain. "Shocked?" said Vimes. "Surprised?" said the doctor. "Rosie won't be, I expect. I don't do anything illegal, you know." "Then you've got nothing to fear," said Vimes. "Really? That proves you're not from around here," said Lorne. "Want some breakfast? There's kidneys." This time it was Vimes's smile that drained. "Lamb?" the doctor added. In the tiny kitchen he prized the lid off a tall stone jar and pulled out a can. Vapour poured off it. "Ice," he said. "Get it from over the road. Keeps food fresh." Vimes's brow wrinkled. "Over the road? You mean the mortuary?" "Don't worry, it's not been used," said Lorne, putting a pan on the stove. "Mr. Garnish drops off a lump a few times a week in payment for being cured of a rather similar medical condition." "But mostly you work for the ladies of, shall we say, negotiable affection?" said Vimes. Lorne gave him a sharp look to see if he was joking, but Vimes's expression hadn't changed. "Not just them," he said. "There are others." "People who come in by the back door," said Vimes, looking around the little room. "People who, for one reason or another, don't want to go to the better-known doctors, or can't afford them," said Lorne. "People who turn up with no identity. And you had a point, John." No, just asking," said Vimes, cursing himself for walking right into it. "I just wondered where you trained." "Why?" "The kind of people who come in by the back door are the kind of people who want results, I imagine." "Ha! Well, I trained in Clatch. They have some novel ideas about medicine over there. They think it's a good idea to get patients better, for one thing." He turned over the kidneys with a fork. "Frankly, Sergeant, I'm pretty much like you. We do what needs doing. We work in unpopular areas, and I suspect we both draw the line somewhere. I'm no butcher. Rosie says you aren't. But you do the job that's in front of you, or people die." "I'll remember that," said Vimes. "And when all's said and done," said Lorne, "there are worse things to do in the world than take the pulse of women." After breakfast, Sergeant-at-Arms John Keel stepped out into the first day of the rest of his life. He stood still for a moment, shut his eyes, and swivelled both feet like a man trying to stub out 2 cigarettes at once. A slow, broad smile spread across his face. Snouty had found just the right kind of boots. Willikins and Sybil between them conspired to prevent him wearing old, well-worn boots those days, and stole them away in the night to have the soles repaired. It was good to feel the streets with dry feet again, and after a lifetime of walking them, he did feel the streets. There were the cobblestones, cat heads, troll heads, loaves, short and long sets, rounders, moorpork sixes, and the 87 types of paving brick, and the 14 types of stone slab, and the 12 types of stone never intended for street slabs but which had got used anyway, and had their own patterns of wear, and the rubbles and the gravels and the repairs, and the 13 different types of cellar cover, and 20 types of drain lid. He bounced a little, like a man testing the hardness of something. "Elm Street," he said. He bounced again. "Junction with Twinkle. Yeah." He was back. It wasn't many steps to Treacle Mine Road, and as he turned towards the watch house, a flash of colour caught his eye. And there it was, overhanging a garden wall. Lilac was common in the city. It was vigorous and hard to kill, and had to be. The flower buds were noticeably swelling. He stood and stared, as a man might stare at an old battlefield. They rise, hands up, hands up, hands up. How did it go now? Think of things happening one after the other. Don't assume that you know what's going to happen, because it might not. Be yourself. And, because he was himself, he made a few little purchases in little shops in dark alleys and went to work. The Treacle Mine Road night watch house was generally deserted around midday, but Vimes knew that Snouty at least would be there. He was a persistent floater, just like Nobby and Colon and Carrot, and when you got down to it, Vimes as well. Being on duty was their default state of being. They hung around the watch house even when off duty, because that's where their lives took place. Being a copper wasn't something you left hanging by the door when you went home. But I promise I'll learn how, thought Vimes. When I get back, it'll all be different. He went around the back and let himself in by the stable entrance. It wasn't even locked. Black mark right there, lads. The iron bulk of the hurry-up wagon stood empty on the cobbles. Behind it was what they called now the stables. In fact, the stables were only the bottom floor of what would have been part of Ankh-Morpork's industrial heritage, if anyone had ever thought of it like that. In practice, they thought of it as junk that was too heavy to cart away. It was part of the winding gear from a treacle mine, long since abandoned. One of the original lifting buckets was still up there, glued to the floor by its last load of the heavy, sticky, unrefined treacle, which, once set, was tougher than cement and more waterproof than tar. Vimes remembered, as a kid, begging chippings of pig treacle off the miners. One lump of that, oozing the sweetness of prehistoric sugar-cane, could keep a boy's mouth happily shut for a week. In the same way that ancient forests become coal, ancient swathes of natural sugar-cane can become, under the pressures of millennia, what in various parts of the disk is known as hokey-pokey, pig treacle, or rock molasses. But much boiling and purification was necessary to create the thick golden syrup that was the city dwellers' honey, and these days Ankh-Morpork supplies come from the more accessible toffee beds near Quirm. Inside the treacle-roofed stable level, chewing a bit of bad hay, was the horse. Vimes knew it was a horse because it checked out as one. 4 hooves, tail, head with mane, seedy brown coat. Considered from another angle, it was half a ton of bones held together with horsehair. He patted it gingerly. As one of nature's pedestrians, he'd never been at home around horses. He unhooked a greasy clipboard from a nail nearby and flicked through its pages. Then he had another look around the yard. Tilden never did that. He looked at the pigsty in the corner where Nock kept his pig, and then at the chicken run, and the pigeon loft, and the badly made rabbit hutches, and he did a few calculations. The old watch house. It was all there, just like the day he first arrived. It had been 2 houses once, and one of them had been the treacle mine office. Everywhere in the city had been something else once, and so the place was a maze of blocked-in doorways and ancient windows and poky rooms. He wandered around like a man in a museum. See the old helmet on a stick for archery practice? See Sergeant Nock's broken springed armchair where he used to sit out on sunny afternoons? And inside the smell, floor wax, stale sweat, armour polish, unwashed clothes, ink, a hint of fried fish, and always, here, a taint of treacle. The night watch. He was back. When the first members of the night watch came in, they found a man perfectly at ease, leaning back in a chair with his feet on a desk and leafing through paperwork. The man had sergeant's stripes and an air of an unsprung trap. He was also giving absolutely no attention to the newcomers. He particularly paid no heed to one gangly Lance Constable who was still new enough to have tried to put a shine on his breastplate. They fanned out among the desks with muttered conversations. Vimes knew them in his soul. They were in the night watch because they were too scruffy, ugly, incompetent, awkwardly shaped or bloody-minded for the day watch. They were honest in that special policeman sense of the word. That is, they didn't steal things too heavy to carry, and they had the morale of damp gingerbread. He'd wondered last night about giving them some kind of pep talk by way of introduction, and decided against it. They might be very bad at it, but they were coppers, and coppers did not respond well to the happy families approach. "Hello, chaps. Call me Christopher. My door's always open. I'm sure if we all pull together, we shall get along splendidly, like one big happy family." They'd seen too many families to fall for that rubbish. Someone cleared their throat with malice aforethought. Vimes glanced up and into the face of Sergeant Knocker Nock, and, for a fraction of a second, had to suppress the urge to salute. Then he remembered what Nock was. "Well," he said. "That's my desk you're sitting at, Sergeant," said Nock. Vimes sighed and pointed to the little crown on his sleeve. "See this, Sergeant," he said. "It's what they used to call the Hat of Authority." Nock's little weaselly eyes focused on the crown, and then they went back to Vimes's face and widened in the shock of recognition. "Bloody hell," breathed Nock. "That's bloody hell, sir," said Vimes. "But Sarge will do, most of the time." "And this is your mob, is it? Oh dear. Well, let's make a start." He swung his feet off the desk and stood up. "I've been looking at the feed bills for Marilyn," he said. "Interesting reading, lads. According to my rough calculations, a horse eating that much ought to be approximately spherical. Instead, she's so thin that with 2 sticks and some sheet music I could give you a tune." Vimes put the papers down. "Don't think I don't know where the corn goes. I bet I know who's got the chickens and rabbits and pigeons," he said. "And the pig. I bet the captain thinks they get fat on leftovers." "Yeah, but—" a voice began. Vimes's hand slammed on the desk. "You lot even starve the damned horse," he said. "That stops right now. So will a lot of other things. I know how it works, see? Mumping free beer and a donut, well, that's part of being a copper. And who knows, there might even be a few greasy spoons in this town so happy to see a copper that they will spontaneously offer him a free nosh. Stranger things have happened. But nicking the oats from Marilyn, that stops now. And another thing. Says here that last night the hurry-up wagon had 8 passengers," he said. 2 of them I know about, because one of them must have been me, and I met the other man. The cells are empty this morning. What happened to the other 6? Sergeant Nock?" The sergeant licked his lips nervously. "Jot them off in Cable Street for questioning, of course," he said, "as per instructions." "Did you get a receipt?" What?" "Your men hauled in 6 people who were staying out late, and you handed them over to the unmentionables," said Vimes, with the calm that comes before a storm. "Did they sign for them? Do you even know their names?" Orders is just to hand 'em over, said Nock, trying a little defiance. Hand 'em over and come away. Vimes filed that for future reference and said, Now, I didn't get taken there because we had a bit of a misunderstanding. And as you can see, it was a bigger misunderstanding than you thought. Because I'm not down in the tanty counting cockroaches, Nock. No, indeed. He took a few steps forward. I'm standing in front of you, Nock. Isn't that what I'm doing? Yes, Sarge, Nock muttered, pale with fear and fury. Yes, Sarge, said Vimes. But there was another man in the cells and he's gone too. All I want to know is how much and who to. I don't want any looks of cherubic innocence. I don't want any don't know what you're talking about, sir. I just want to know how much and who to. A cloud of red, resentful solidarity settled over the faces in front of him. But he didn't need telling. He could remember. Corporal Quirk always had a private income from bribes. He'd been like Nobby Nobbs without the latter's amiable incompetence. An efficient Nobby, in fact, and you could throw into the mix bullying and brown-nosing and a delight in small evils. Vimes's gaze fell on Quirk and stayed there. I know you were on a wagon last night, Corporal, he said. You and Lance Constable, Vimes, it says here. Not worth worrying if they look a decent sort, Quirk had said. And he'd said, How can we tell if they're a decent sort, Corp? Well, you see how much they can afford. You mean we let them go if they're rich? Way of the world, lad, way of the world. No reason why we shouldn't get our share, eh? Did you see his money bag? $5 should do it. 4 for me and 1 for you, 'cause you're learning. That's nearly 3 days' pay. It'll cheer up your old mum no end. And where's the loser? But suppose he's nicked the money, Corp. Suppose the moon was made of cheese. Would you like a slice? I think it was $5, Corporal, said Vimes, and watched the man's lizard eyes flash towards the young Lance Constable. No, the man in the cell talked, lied Vimes. Told me I was an idiot not to buy me way out. So, Mr. Quirk, it's like this. They're crying out for good men in the day watch, but if you don't stand too close to light, you might pass. Get along there right now. Everybody does it, Quirk burst out. It's perks, everybody, said Vimes. He looked around at the squad. Anyone else here take bribes? His glare ran from face to face, causing most of the squad to do an immediate impression of the floorboard and ceiling inspector's synchronized observation team. Only 3 members met his gaze. There was Lance Corporal Colon, who could be a little slow. There was a certain Lance Constable whose face was a mask of terror, and there was a dark-haired, round-faced constable who seemed to be puzzled, as if he was trying to remember something, but who nevertheless stared back with the firm, steady gaze of the true liar. Apparently not, said Vimes. Quirk's finger shot out and vibrated in the direction of young Sam Vimes. He shared it, he said. You ask him. Vimes felt the shock run round the squad. Quirk had just committed suicide. You hung together against officers, fair enough, but when the jig was up, you did not drop someone in the khaki. They'd laugh at the idea of a watchman's honour, but it did exist in a black and twisty way. You did not drop your mates in the khaki, and especially you did not do it to a wet-behind-the-ears rookie who wouldn't know any better. Vimes turned for the first time to the young man he'd been avoiding. Gods, was I ever that skinny, he thought. Did I ever have that much Adam's apple? Did I really try to polish rust? The young man's eyes were almost back in his head, only the whites showing. Lance Constable Vimes, isn't it? He said quietly. Yes, sir, said Sam hoarsely. At ease, Lance Constable. Did you, in fact, take a share of the bribe? Yes, sir, $1, sir. At the instigation of Corporal Quirk? Sir? Did he offer it to you? Vimes translated. Vimes watched his own agony. You did not drop someone in the khaki. All right, he said at last. I'll talk to you later on. Oh, you still here, Quirk? If you want to complain to the captain, that's fine by me. But if you don't get your stuff out of your locker in 10 minutes, I'll damn well charge you rent. Quirk looked around for immoral support and found none. He'd gone too far. Besides, the watch could see a storm of khaki when it was right overhead, and were in no mood to stick their necks out for something like Quirk. I will, he said. I will complain to the captain. You'll see. I've got 4 years good conduct, I have. No, that was 4 years not found out, said Vimes. Clear off. When Quirk's footsteps had died away, Vimes glared at the squad. Good afternoon, lads. My name's John Keel, he said. We bloody well better get along fine. Now shine up. Captain's inspection in 2 minutes. Off you go. Sergeant Knock, a word, please. The men dispersed hurriedly. Knock stepped forward, not quite managing to conceal his nervousness. After all, his immediate superior now was a man who, last night, he had kicked in the nadgers. People could hold a grudge about a thing like that. And he'd had time to think. I'd just like to say, sir, about last night, he began. I'm not bothered about last night, said Vimes. You're not? Would you recommend Fred Colon for corporal? I'd value your judgment. You would? Certainly. He looks a solid lad. He is? Yes, he is. Very thorough, said Knock, relief rising off him like steam. Doesn't rush into things. Wants to join one of the regiments. Well, we'll give him a try while we've still got him. That means we'll need another Lance Corporal. Who was that lad next to Colon? Coates, sir, Ned Coates. Bright lad. Sometimes thinks he knows better, but we were all like that, eh? Vimes nodded. His expression completely failed to give away the fact that, as far as he was concerned, there were things clinging to the underside of high branches that knew better than Sergeant Knock. A taste of responsibility might do him some good, then, he said. Knock nodded, because at that point he would have agreed to absolutely anything. And his body language was saying, we're all sergeants together, right? We're talking about sergeant-y things like sergeants do. We're not bothered about anyone being kicked in the nadgers, eh? Not us, 'cause we're sergeants. His eyes widened, and he saluted as Tilden entered the office. There was some half-hearted saluting amongst the squad, too. The captain acknowledged them stiffly and looked nervously at Vimes. Sergeant, he said. Settling in? Yes, sir, no problems. Well done, carry on. When the man had disappeared up the creaking stairs, Vimes turned back to Knock. Sergeant, we don't hand over prisoners without a receipt. Understand? Never. What happens to them afterwards, do you know? They get questioned, said Knock. We takes them up there for questioning. What kind of questions? How long it takes 2 men to dig half a hole? What? From now on, someone at Cable Street signs for prisoners or we bring 'em right back here, said Vimes. It's bloody elementary, Sergeant. You hand 'em over, you get a docket. Don't you do that down at the Tanty? Well, yeah, obviously, but, Cable Street, you don't know what it's like here. I can see that, but with the unmentionables around at Cable Street, it's best not to... Listen, I'm not telling you to kick the door down and shout, put down those thumbscrews, said Vimes. I'm telling you we keep track of prisoners. When you arrest a man, you sign him over to Snouty, don't you? When he leaves, Snouty or the orderly man signs him out, doesn't he? It's basic custody discipline, man. So, if you hand a prisoner over to Cable Street, someone there gives you a signature, understand? No one just disappears. Knock's face showed a man contemplating an immediate future that contained fewer opportunities for personal gain and a greatly raised risk of being shouted at. And just to make sure everyone understands, I'll ride the wagon tonight, said Vimes. But first, I'll take that lad Vimes out for a stroll and shake him up a bit. He could do with it, said Knock. Can't get his mind right. Good with his hands, but you have to tell him everything twice. Maybe I'll shout then, said Vimes. Vimes! Lance Constable Vimes shivered to attention. We're going to take a stroll, lad, said Vimes. Time you knew what's what." He nodded to Nock, took his younger self by the shoulder, and marched out. "What do you think, Sarge?" said Coates, coming up behind Nock as the sergeant glared at the departing back. "He likes you," said Nock bitterly. "Oh, yes, apple of his eye, you are. You're his old pal. You're being bumped up to Lance Corporal." "Think he'll last?" "I'll give him a couple of weeks," said Nock. "I've seen 'em like that before. Big men in little towns coming here, thinking of the bee's nose. We soon cut 'em down to size. What do you think?" "Dunno, Sarge," said Coates. "Still thinking." "Knows he's coppering, mind you," said Nock. "Bit too cocky, though. He'll learn. He'll learn. There's ways. We'll show him. Take him down a peg. Teach him how we do things around here." Vimes always preferred to walk by himself, and now there were two of him walking by himself. It was a strange sensation, and gave him the impression that he was looking through a mask. "No, not like that," he said. "I always have to teach people to walk. You swing the foot like this. Get it right and you can keep going all day. You're not in a hurry. You don't want to miss things." "Yes, Sarge," said young Sam. It was called proceeding. Vimes proceeded along Treacle Mine Road and felt magnificent. Of course there were lots of things to worry about, but right here and now all he had to do was patrol, and it felt fine. Not much paperwork in the old watch. In fact, come to think of it, he'd probably doubled it. All he had to do right now was his duty, as he'd been taught it. He had nothing to do but be himself. Young Sam wasn't saying much. That was good sense. "I see you got a bell there, lad," said Vimes after a while. "Yes, Sarge." "Regulation bell?" "Yes, Sarge. Sergeant Nock gave it me." "I'll bet he did," thought Vimes. "When we get back, just you swap it for someone else's. Doesn't matter whose. No one will say anything." "Yes, Sarge." Vimes waited. "Why, Sarge, a bell's a bell." "Not that one," said Vimes. "That's 3 times the weight of the normal bell. They give it to rookies to see what they do. Did you complain?" "No, Sarge." "That's the way. Keep quiet and pass it on to some other sucker when we get back. That's the copper's way." "Why did you come into the job, lad?" "My mate Iffy joined last year. He said you got free food and a uniform and you could pick up the extra $1 here and there." "That'd be Iffy Scurrick station over in the Dolly sisters' house then," said Vimes. "And you've been picking up the odd $1, have you?" They walked in silence for a moment. Then Sam said, "Have I got to give that $1 back, Sarge?" "Are you worth $1?" said Vimes. "I gave it to our mum, Sarge." "Did you tell her how you got it?" "I didn't want it," Sam blurted out, "but Corporal Quirk said—" "Was he worth listening to?" "Dunno, Sarge." "You don't know? I bet your mum didn't bring you up to think like that," said Vimes. No, she bloody well didn't, he thought. She'd tan your hide, copper or not, if she knew it was a dodgy $1. "No, Sarge, but they're all at it, Sarge. I don't mean the lads, Sarge, but you only have to look around the city. Our rent's going up, taxes go up. There's these new taxes all the time, and it's all just cruel, Sarge, it's cruel. Wind has sold us all to his mates, and that's a fact, sir." Said Vimes. "Oh, yes, tax farming. What a clever invention. Good old Winder. He'd flogged the right to collect taxes to the highest bidders. What a great idea. Nearly as good as banning people from carrying weapons after dark. Because A, you saved the cost of tax collectors and the whole revenue business. B, you got a wagon load of cash up front. And C, the business of tax gathering then became the business of groups of powerful yet curiously reticent people who kept out of the light. However, they employed people who not only went out in the light, but positively blocked it. And it was amazing what those people found to tax, up to and including looking at me, pal. What was it Veterinary had said once? Taxation is just a sophisticated way of demanding money with menaces. Well, the tax farmers were very unsophisticated in the way they went about recouping their investment. He remembered these days. The city had never seemed poorer, but by the gods there was a lot of tax being paid. Hard to explain to a kid like Sam why pouncing $1 when you got the chance was a bad thing to do. "Put it like this, Lance Constable," as they turned the corner. "Would you let a murderer off for $1,000? "No, sir." $1,000 would set your mum up in a nice place in a good part of town, though. "Knock it off, Sarge, I'm not like that." "You were when you took that $1. Everything else is just haggling over the price." They walked in sullen silence. Then, "Am I going to get the sack, Sarge?" said the Lance Constable. "For $1? No." "I'd just as soon be sacked, Sarge, thanks all the same," said young Sam defiantly. "Last Friday we had to go and break up some meeting over near the university. They were just talking, and we had to take orders from some civilian, and the Cable Street lads were a bit rough, and it's not like the people had weapons or anything. You can't tell me that's right, Sarge. And then we loaded some of them into the hurry-up just for talking. Mrs. Owlsley's boy, Elson, never came home the other night, too. And they say he was dragged off to the palace just for saying his lordship's a loony. Now people down our street are looking at me in a funny way." "Ye gods, I remember," thought Vimes. "I thought it was all going to be chasing men who gave up after the length of a street and said, 'It's a fair cop, governor.' I thought I'd have a medal at the end of the week." "You want to be careful what you say, lad," he said. "Yeah, but our mum says it's fair enough if they take away the troublemakers and the weirdies, but it's not right them taking away ordinary people." Is this really me, Vimes thought? Did I really have the political awareness of a headlouse? Anyway, he is a loony. Snapcase is the man we ought to have. And the self-preservation instincts of a lemming. Kid, here's some advice. In this town, right now, if you don't know who you're talking to, don't talk. Yeah, but Snapcase says, listen. A copper doesn't keep flapping his lip. He doesn't let on what he knows. He doesn't say what he's thinking. No. He watches and listens and he learns and he bides his time. His mind works like mad, but his face is a blank. Until he's ready. Understand? All right, Sarge. Good. Can you use that sword you have there, lad? I did the training, yeah? Fine. Fine, the training, fine. So if we're attacked by a lot of sacks of straw hanging from a beam, I can rely on you. And until then, shut up. Keep your ears open and your eyes peeled and learn something. Snapcase is the man to save us, he thought glumly. Yeah, I used to believe that. A lot of people did. Just because he rode around in an open carriage occasionally and called people over and talked to them, the level of the conversation being on the lines of, so you're a carpenter, are you? Wonderful. What does that job entail? Just because he said publicly that perhaps taxes were a bit on the high side. Just because he waved. You've been here before, Sarge, said Sam as they turned a corner. Oh, everyone's visited Ankh-Morpork, lad, said Vimes jovially. Only we're doing the Elm Street beats perfectly, Sarge, and I've been letting you lead the way. Damn. That was the kind of trouble your feet could get you into. A wizard once told Vimes that there were monsters up near the hub that were so big they had to have extra brains in their legs because they were too far away for one brain to think fast enough. And a beats copper grew brains in his feet, he really did. Elm Street, left into the pits, left again into the scours. It was the first beat he'd ever walked, and he could do it without thinking. He had done it without thinking. I'll do my own work, he said. Did you recognise Ned? Said Sam. Perhaps it was a good thing that he was leaving his feet to their own devices, because Vimes's brain suddenly filled with warning bells. Ned, he said. Only before you came, he said he thought he remembered you from Pseudopolis, said Sam, oblivious to the clamour. He was in the day watch there before he came here, because of better promotion prospects. Big man, he said. Can't say I recall him, said Vimes with care. You're not all that big, Sarge. Well, Ned was probably shorter in those days, said Vimes, while his thoughts shouted, Shut up, kid. But the kid was, well, him, niggling at little details, tugging at things that didn't seem to fit right. Being a copper, in fact. Probably he ought to feel proud of his younger self, but he didn't. You're not me, he thought. I don't think I was ever as young as you. If you're going to be me, It's going to take a lot of work. 30 damn years of being hammered on the anvil of life, you poor bastard. You've got it all to come. Back at the watch house, Vimes wandered idly over to the evidence and lost property cupboard. It had a big lock on it which was not, however, ever locked. He soon found what he was looking for. An unpopular copper needed to think ahead, and he intended to be unpopular. Then he had a bite of supper and a mug of the thick brown cocoa on which the night watch ran, and took Sam out on the hurry-up wagon. He'd wondered how the watch was going to play it, and wasn't surprised to find they were using the old dodge of obeying orders to the letter with gleeful malignancy. At the first point he made, Lance Corporal Coates and Constable Waddy were waiting with 4 sullen or protesting insomniacs. "4, sir," said Coates, ripping off a textbook salute. "All we've apprehended, sir. All written down on this chitty, what I am giving to you at this moment in time, sir." "Well done," said Vimes dryly, taking the paperwork, signing one copy and handing it back. "You may have half holiday at Ogswatch and give my regards to your granny. Help 'em in with 'em, Sam." "We usually only get 4 or 5 on a round, sir," Sam whispered as they pulled away. "What'll we do?" "Make several journeys," said Vimes. "But the lads were taking the Michael, sir. They were laughing." "It's past curfew," said Vimes. "That's the law." Corporal Colon and Constable Wiglet were waiting at their post with 3 miscreants. One of them was Miss Palm. Vimes gave Sam the reins and jumped down to open the back of the wagon and fold down the steps. "Sorry to see you here, miss," he said. "Apparently some new sergeant's been throwing his weight around," said Rosie Palm in a voice of solid ice. She refused his hand haughtily and climbed up into the wagon. Vimes realised that one of the other detainees was a woman too. She was shorter than Rosie and was giving him a look of pure bantam defiance. She was also holding a huge quilted work basket. Out of reflex, Vimes took it to help her up the steps. "Sorry about this, miss," he began. "Get your hands off that!" She snatched the basket back and scrambled into the darkness. "Pardon me," said Vimes. "This is Miss Batty," said Rosie Palm from the bench inside the wagon. "She's a seamstress." "Well, I assume "A seamstress, I said," said Miss Palm, "with needles and thread. Also specialises in crochet." Is that a kind of extra?" Vimes began. "It's a type of knitting," said Miss Batty from the darkness of the wagon. "Fancy you not knowing that." "You mean she's a real?" said Vimes, but Rosie slammed the iron door. "You just drive us on," she said, "and when I see you again, John Keel, we are going to have words." There was some sniggering from the shadows inside the wagon, and then a yelp. It had been immediately preceded by the noise of a spiky heel being driven into an instep. Vimes signed the grubby form presented to him by Fred Colon and handed it back with the solid, fixed expression that made the man feel rather worried. "Where to now, Sarge?" said Sam as they pulled away. "Cable Street," said Vimes. There was a murmur of dismay from the crated people behind them. "That's not right," muttered Sam. "We're playing this by the rules," said Vimes. "You're going to have to learn why we have rules, Lance Constable. And don't you eyeball me. I've been eyeballed by experts, and you look as if you're desperate for the privy." "Yeah, all right. But everyone knows they torture people," mumbled Sam. "Do they?" said Vimes. "Then why doesn't anyone do anything about it?" "'Cause they torture people." "Ah, at least I was getting a grip of basic social dynamics," thought Vimes. Sullen silence reigned in the seat beside him as the wagon rumbled through the streets, but he was aware of whispering behind him. Slightly louder than the background, he heard Rosie Palm's voice hiss, "He won't, I'll bet anything." A few seconds later, a male voice, slightly the worse for drink and very much the worse for bladder-twisting dread, managed, "Sergeant, I believe the fine is $5. "I don't think it is, sir," said Vimes, keeping his eyes on the damp streets. There was some more frantic whispering, and then the voice said, "I have a very nice gold ring." "Glad to hear it, sir," said Vimes. Everyone should have something nice. He patted his pocket for his silver cigar case, and for a moment felt more anger than despair, and more sorrow than anger. There was a future. There had to be. He remembered it, but it only existed as that memory, and that was fragile as the reflection on a soap bubble, and maybe just as easily popped. I could perhaps include, if you try to offer me a bribe one more time, sir, said Vimes as the wagon turned into Cable Street, I shall personally give you a thumping. Be told. Perhaps there is some other, Rosie Palm began as the lights of the Cable Street house came into view. We're not at home to a tuppenny upright either, said Vimes, and heard the gasp. Shut up, the lot of you. He reined Marilyn to a halt, jumped down and pulled his clipboard from under the seat. 7 for you, he said to the guard lounging against the door. Well, said the guard, open it up and let's be having 'em then. Right, said Vimes, flicking through the paperwork. No problem. He thrust the clipboard forward. Just sign here. The man recoiled as though Vimes had tried to offer him a snake. What do you mean, sign? He said. Hand 'em over. You sign, said Vimes woodenly. That's the rules. Prisoners move from one custody to another. You have to sign. More my job's worth not to get a signature. Your job's not worth spit, snarled the man, grabbing the board. He looked at it blankly, and Vimes handed him the pencil. If you need any help with the difficult letters, let me know, he said helpfully. Growling, the guard scrawled something on the paper and thrust it back. Now open up, please, he said. Certainly, said Vimes, glancing at the paper. But now I'd like to see some form of ID, thank you. What? It's not me, you understand, said Vimes. But if I went back and showed my captain this piece of paper and he said to me, Keel, how do you know he's Henry the Hamster? Well, I'd be a bit flummoxed. Maybe even perplexed. Listen, we don't sign for prisoners. We do, Henry, said Vimes. No signature, no prisoners. And you'll stop us from taking them, will you? Said Henry the Hamster, taking a few steps forward. You lay a hand on that door, said Vimes, and I'll chop it off, will you? I'll arrest you, said Vimes. Obstruction would be a good start, but we can probably think of some more charges back at the station. Arrest me, but I'm a copper, same as you. Wrong again, said Vimes. What is the trouble here? Said a voice. A small, thin figure appeared in the torchlight. Henry the Hamster took a step back and adopted a certain deferential pose. Officer won't hand over the curfew breakers, sir, he said. And this is the officer? Said the figure, lurching towards Vimes with a curiously erratic gait. Yes, sir. Vimes found himself under cool and not openly hostile inspection from a pale man with the screwed-up eyes of a pet rat. Ah, said the man, opening a little tin and taking out a green throat pastille. Would you be Keel by any chance? I have been hearing about you. The man's voice was as uncertain as his walk, pauses turned up in the wrong places. You hear about things quickly, sir. A salute is generally in order, Sergeant. I don't see anything to salute, sir, said Vimes. Good point. Good point. You are new, of course, but you see, we, in the particulars, often find it necessary to wear plain clothes. Like rubber aprons, if I recall correctly, thought Vimes. Aloud he said, Yes, sir. It was a good phrase. It could mean any of a dozen things, or nothing at all. It was just punctuation until the man said something else. I'm Captain Swing, said the man. Find the Swing. If you think the name is amusing, please smirk, and get it over with. You may now salute. Vimes saluted. Swing's mouth turned up at the corners very briefly. Good. Your first night in a hurry-up wagon, Sergeant. Sir? And you're here so early. With a full load, too. Shall we take a look at your passengers? He glanced in between the ironwork. "Ah, yes. Good evening, Miss Palm. And an associate, I see. Du crochet. And what appear to be some party-goers. Well, well." Swing stood back. "What little scamps your street officers are, to be sure. They really have scoured the streets. How they love their little jokes, Sergeant." Swing put his hand on the wagon door's handle, and there was a little noise which was nevertheless a thunderclap in the silence, and it was the sound of a sword moving very slightly in its scabbard. Swing stood stock still for a moment, and then delicately popped the pastel into his mouth. "Aha! I think that perhaps this little catch can be thrown back, don't you, Sergeant? We don't want to make a mockery of the law. Take them away. Take them away." "Yes, sir." "But just one moment, please, Sergeant. Indulge me. Just a little hobby of mine." "Sir?" Swing had reached into a pocket of his overlong coat and pulled out a very large pair of steel calipers. Vimes flinched as they were opened up to measure the width of his head, the width of his nose, and the length of his eyebrows. Then a metal ruler was pressed against one ear. While doing this, Swing was mumbling under his breath. Then he closed the calipers with a snap and slipped them back. "I must congratulate you, Sergeant," he said, "in overcoming your considerable natural disadvantages. Do you know you have the eye of a mass murderer? I am never wrong in these matters." "No, sir. Didn't know that, sir. We'll try to keep it closed, sir," said Vimes. Swing didn't crack a smile. "However, I'm sure that when you have settled in, you and Corporal Hamster here will get along like a house on fire." "A house on fire, yes, sir." "Don't let me detain you, Sergeant Keel." Vimes saluted. Swing nodded, turned in one movement as though he were on a swivel, and strode back into the watch-house. Or jerked, Vimes considered. The man moved in the same way he'd talked, in a curious mixture of speeds. It was as if he was powered by springs. When he moved a hand, the first few inches of movement were a blur, and then it gently coasted until it was brought into conjunction with whatever was the intended target. Sentences came out in spurts and pauses. There was no rhythm to the man. Vimes ignored the fuming corporal and climbed back onto the wagon. "Turn us round, Lance Constable," he said. "Good night, Henry." Sam waited until the wheels were rumbling over the cobbles before he turned wide-eyed to Vimes. "You were going to drawn him, weren't you?" he said. "You were, Sarge, weren't you?" "You just keep your eyes on the road, Lance Constable." "But that was Captain Swing, that was. And when you told that man to prove he was Henry the Hamster, I thought I'd choke. You knew they weren't going to sign, right, Sarge? Because if there's a bit of paper saying they've got someone, then if anyone wants to find out—" "Just drive, Lance Constable." But the boy was right. For some reason, the unmentionables both loved and feared paperwork. They certainly generated a lot of it. They wrote everything down. They didn't like appearing on other people's paperwork, though. That worried them. "I can't believe we got away with it, Sarge." "We probably haven't," Vimes thought. "But Swing has enough to worry him at the moment. He doesn't care very much about a big stupid sergeant." He turned and banged on the ironwork. "Sorry for the inconvenience, ladies and gentlemen, but it appears the unmentionables are not doing business tonight. Looks like we'll have to do the interrogation ourselves. We're not very experienced at this, so I hope we don't get it wrong. Now, listen carefully. Are any of you serious conspirators bent on the overthrow of the government?" There was a stunned silence from within the wagon. Come on," said Vimes. "I haven't got all night. Does anyone want to overthrow Lord Winder by force?" "Well, no," said the voice of Miss Palm. "Or by crochet?" "I heard that," said another female voice sharply. "No one? Shame," said Vimes. "Well, that's good enough for me. Lance Constable, is it good enough for you?" Yes, Sarge." In that case, we'll drop you all off on our way home, and my charming assistant, Lance Constable Vimes, will take, $50 off each of you for travelling expenses, for which you will get a receipt. Thank you for travelling with us, and we hope you will consider the hurry-up wagon in your future curfew-breaking arrangements. Vimes could hear shocked whispering behind him. This was not how things were supposed to go these days. "Sarge," said Lance Constable Vimes. "Yep." "Have you really got the eye of a mass murderer?" "In the pocket of my other suit, yes." Sam was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, he seemed to have something new on his mind. Sarge?" "Yes, lad?" "What's a tuppenny upright, Sarge?" "It's a kind of jam donut, lad. Did your mum ever make 'em?" "Yes, Sarge." "Sarge?" "Yes, lad?" "I think it probably means something else as well, Sarge," said Sam, sniggering. "Something a bit rude." "The whole of life is a learning process, Lance Constable." They got the wagon back to the yard 10 minutes later, and by that time Vimes knew that a new rumour was fanning out across the city. Young Sam had already whispered things to the other officers as curfew breakers were dropped off. And nobody gossips like a copper. They didn't like the unmentionables. Like petty criminals everywhere, the watchmen prided themselves that there were some depths to which they would not sink. There had to be some things below you, even if it was only mudworms. Rosie Palm bolted the door of her flat, leaned on it and stared at Sandra. "What is he?" said Sandra, dumping her work basket on the table. It clanked within. "Is he on our side?" "You heard the lads," snapped Rosie. "No bribes now. And he drags us off to Swing's bastards, and then he won't hand us over. I could kill him. I rescued him from the gutter, got Mossy to patch him up, and suddenly he's playing big silly games." "Yes. What is a tuppenny upright?" said Sandra brightly. Miss Palm paused. She quite enjoyed Sandra's company, and the extra rent certainly came in handy, but there were times she wondered whether A, she should have a talk with the girl, or B, she was being very gently wound up. She suspected the latter, since Sandra was making more money than her most of the time. It was getting embarrassing. "It's a kind of jam donut," she said. "Now, you'd better go and hide the—" Someone knocked on the door behind her. She motioned Sandra through the bead curtain, took a moment to pull herself together, and opened the door a fraction. There was a very small old man standing in the hall. Everything about him sloped hopelessly downwards. His grey moustache could have been stolen from a walrus, or a bloodhound that had just been given some very bad news. His shoulders sagged listlessly. Even parts of his face seemed to be losing the battle with gravity. He held his cap in his hands and was twisting it nervously. "Yes?" said Rosie. It says seamstress on the sign," the old man mumbled. "And, well, since my old woman died, you know, what with one thing and another, never been any good at doing it for myself." He gave Rosie a look of sheer, helpless embarrassment. She glanced down at the sack by his feet and picked it up. It was full of very clean but very worn socks. Every single one had holes in the heel and toe. "Sandra," she said, "I think this one's for you." It was so very early in the morning that late at night wasn't quite over. White mist hung everywhere in the streets and deposited droplets like tiny pearls on Vimes's shirt as he prepared to break the law. If you stood on the roof of the privy behind the watch-house and steadied yourself on the drainpipe, one of the upstairs windows would bounce open if you hit it with the palm of your hand in exactly the right place. It was a useful bit of information, and Vimes wondered if he should pass it on to young Sam. Every honest copper ought to know how to break into his own nick. Tilden had limped home long ago, but Vimes did a quick sweep of his office, and it was with great satisfaction that he did not see what he hadn't expected to be there. Down below, a few of the more conscientious officers were signing off before heading home. He waited in the shadows until the door had banged shut for the last time, for several minutes. Then he made his way down the stairs and into the locker room. He had been issued with a key to his own locker, but still oiled the hinge from a small bottle before he opened it. He had not in fact put anything in there yet, but behold, there was a rumpled sack on the floor. He lifted it up. Well done, lads. Inside was Captain Tilden's silver inkwell. Vimes stood up and looked around at the lockers with their ancient carved initials and occasional knife marks on the doors. He pulled from his pocket the little black cloth roll he'd taken from the evidence locker earlier. A selection of lockpicks glinted in the grey light. Vimes wasn't a genius with the hooks and rakes, but the cheap and worn door locks were hardly a major challenge. Really, it was just a matter of choosing. And afterwards, he walked back through the mists. He was horrified to find he was feeling good again. It was a betrayal of Sybil and the Future Watch, and even of his Grace Sir Samuel Vimes, who had to think about the politics of distant countries and manpower requirements, and how to raise that damn boat that the River Division kept sinking. And yes, he wanted to go back, or forwards, or across, or whatever. He really did. He wanted to go home so much he could taste it. Of course he did, but he couldn't. Not yet. And here he was, and, as Dr. Lorne said, you did the job. And currently, the job involved survival on the street in the great game of silly buggers, and Vimes knew all about that game, oh yes. And there was a thrill in it. It was the nature of the beast. And thus he was walking along lost in thought when the men jumped him from out of the mouth of a shadowy alley. The first one got a foot in the stomach, because the beast does not fight fair. Vimes stepped aside and grabbed the other one. He felt the knife skitter along his breastplate as he lowered his head and tugged the man hard into the helmet. The man folded up quite neatly on the cobbles. Vimes spun around to the first man, who was bent almost double, and wheezing, but had nevertheless kept hold of his knife, which he waved around in front of him like some kind of talisman. The point made erratic figures of 8 in the air. "Drop it," said Vimes. "I won't ask again." He sighed and pulled an object out of his back pocket. It was black and tapered and made of leather filled with lead shot. He'd banned them in the modern watch, but he knew some officers had acquired them, and if he judged the man to be sensible, then he didn't know they'd got them. Sometimes an argument had to be ended quickly, and there were worse alternatives. He brought the blackjack down on the man's arm with a certain amount of care. There was a whimper, and the knife bounced off the cobbles. "We'll leave your chum to sleep it off," he said. "But you are coming to see the doctor, Henry. Are you coming quietly?" A few minutes later, Dr. Lorne opened his back door, and Vimes brushed past the body over his shoulders. "You minister to all sorts, right?" said Vimes. "Within reason, but—" "This one's an unmentionable," said Vimes. "Tried to kill me. Needs some medicine." "Why is he unconscious?" said the doctor. He was wearing a huge rubber apron and rubber boots. "Didn't want to take his medicine." Lorne sighed, and with a hand that held a mop he waved Vimes towards an inner door. "Bring him right into the surgery," he said. "I'm afraid I'm cleaning up after Mr. Salsiferous in the waiting room." "Why, what did he do?" "He bust." Vimes, his natural inquisitiveness suddenly curbed, carried the body into Lorne's inner sanctum. It looked quite different from when Vimes had last seen it, but then he'd barely been capable of taking in details. There was the table and a workbench, and all along one wall were racks of bottles. No 2 bottles were the same size. In 1 or 2 of them, things floated. On another wall were the instruments. "When I die," said Lorne, inspecting the patient, "I'm going to instruct them to put a bell on my tombstone, just so's I can have the pleasure of not getting up when people ring." "Put him down, please. Looks like concussion." "That was me hitting him," said Vimes helpfully. "You broke his arm, too." "That's right." "You made a very neat job of it. Easy to set and plaster him up. Is there something wrong?" Vimes was still staring at the instruments. "You use all these," he said. "Yes. Some of them are experimental, though," said Lorne, busying himself at his work table. "Well, I'd hate you to use this one on me," said Vimes, picking a strange instrument like a couple of paddles tied with string. Lorne sighed. "Sergeant, there are no circumstances where the things you're holding could possibly be used on you," he said, his hands working busily. "They are of a feminine nature." "For the seamstresses," said Vimes, putting the pliers down in a hurry. "Those things? No, the ladies of the night take pride these days in never requiring that sort of thing. My work with them is more of, shall we say, a preventative nature." "Teaching them to use thimbles, that sort of thing," said Vimes. Yes, it's amazing how far you can push a metaphor, isn't it? Vimes prodded the paddles again. They were quite alarming. You're married, Sergeant, said Lorne. Was Rosie right? Yeah. My wife is, elsewhere, though. He picked the things up and dropped them hastily again with a clatter. Well, it's just as well to be aware that giving birth isn't like shelling peas, said the doctor. I should bloody well hope not. Although I have to say that the midwives seldom refer anything to me. They say men shouldn't fish around where they don't belong. We might as well be living in caves. Lorne looked down at his patient. In the words of the philosopher Skeptum, the founder of my profession, am I going to get paid for this? Vimes investigated the money bag on the man's belt. Well, $6 do it, he said. Why would the unmentionables attack you, Sergeant? You're a policeman. I am, but they aren't. Don't you know about them? I've patched up a few of their guests, yes, said Lorne, and Vimes noted the caution. It didn't pay to know too much in this town. People with curious dislocations, hot wax burns, that sort of thing. Well, I had a little brush with Captain Swing last night, Vimes said, and he was as polite as hell to me about it. But I'd bet my boots he knows that this lad and his friend came after me. That's his style. He'd probably want to see what I'd do. He's not the only one interested in you, said Lorne. I got a message that Rosie Palm wants to see you. Well, I assume she meant you. That ungrateful bastard was the actual term she used. I think I owe her some money, said Vimes, but I've no idea how much. Don't ask me, said Lorne, smoothing the plaster with his hand. She generally names her price up front. I mean a finder's fee or whatever it was. Yes, I know. Can't help you there, I'm afraid, said Lorne. Vimes watched him working for a while and said, Know anything about Miss Batty? The seamstress. She hasn't been here long. And she's really a seamstress. For the sake of precision, said Dr. Lorne, let us say she's a needlewoman. Apparently she heard there was a lot of work for seamstresses in the big city, and had one or two amusing misunderstandings before someone told her exactly what was meant. One of them involved me removing a crochet hook from a man's ear last week. Now she just hangs out with the rest of the girls. Why? Because she's making a fortune, that's why, said the doctor. Hasn't it ever occurred to you, Sergeant, that sometimes people go to a massage parlour for a real massage, for example? There's ladies all over this city with discreet signs up that say things like, trousers are repaired while you wait. And a small but significant number of men make the same mistake as Sandra. There's lots of men work here in the city and leave their wives back home, and sometimes, you know, a man feels these urges, like for a sock without holes and a shirt with more than one button. The ladies pass on the work. Apparently it's quite hard to find a really good needlewoman in this city. They don't like being confused with seamstresses. I just wondered why she hangs around the street corners after curfew with a big sewing basket, said Vimes. Lorne shrugged. Can't help you there. Right, I've finished with this gentleman. It'd be helpful if he lies still for a while. He indicated the racks of bottles behind him. About how long will you want him to lie still for? You can do that. Oh, yes. It's not accepted Ankh-Morpork medical practice, but since Ankh-Morpork medical practice would consist of hitting him on the head with a mallet, he's probably getting the best of the deal. No, I meant that you doctors aren't supposed to hurt people, are you? Only in the course of normal incompetence. But I don't mind sending him to Sleepyland for another 20 minutes. Of course, if you want to wham him with the mallet, I can't stop you. The last guest of swing I treated had several fingers pointing entirely the wrong way. So if you'd like to give him a few wallops for good luck, I could point out some quite sensitive areas. No, thanks. I'll just haul him out the back way and drop him in an alley. Is that all? No. Then I'll sign my name on his damn plaster cast, so he sees it when he wakes up. in bloody big letters so it won't rub off. Now that's what I call a sensitive area, said Lorne. You're an interesting man, Sergeant. You make enemies like a craftsman. I've never been interested in needlework, said Vimes, hoisting the man on his shoulder. But what sort of things would a needlewoman have in her work basket, do you think? Oh, I don't know. Needles, thread, scissors, wool, that kind of thing, said Mossy Lorne. Not very heavy things, then, said Vimes. Not really. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, said Vimes, making a small mental note. Just a thought. I'll go and drop off our friend here while I've still got some mist to lurk in. Fine. I'll have breakfast on when you get back. It's liver. Calves. The beast remembers. This time Vimes slept soundly. He had always found it easier to sleep during the day. 25 years on nights had ground their nocturnal groove in his brain. Darkness was easier somehow. He knew how to stand still, a talent that few possess, and how to merge into the shadows. How to guard, in fact, and see without being seen. He remembered Find Thee Swing. A lot of it was history. The revolt would have happened with Swing or without him, but he was, as it were, the tip of the boil. He'd been trained at the assassin's school, and should never have been allowed to join the watch. He had too much brain to be a copper. At least, too much of the wrong kind of brain. But Swing had impressed Winder with his theories, had been let in as a sergeant, and then promoted to captain immediately. Vimes had never known why. It was probably because the officers were offended at seeing such a fine gentleman pounding the streets with the rest of the oiks. Besides, he had a weak chest or something. Vimes wasn't against intellect. Anyone with enough savvy to let go of a doorknob could be a street monster in the old days, but to make it above sergeant you needed a grab bag of guile, cunning, and street wisdom that could pass for intelligence in a poor light. Swing, though, started in the wrong place. He didn't look around and watch and learn and then say, "This is how people are, how do we deal with it?" No, he sat and thought, "This is how people ought to be, how do we change them?" And that was a good enough thought for a priest, but not for a copper, because Swing's patient, pedantic way of operating had turned policing on its head. There had been that weapons law for a start. Weapons were involved in so many crimes that, Swing reasoned, reducing the number of weapons had to reduce the crime rate. Vimes wondered if he'd sat up in bed in the middle of the night and hugged himself when he dreamed that one up. Confiscate all weapons and crime would go down. It made sense. It would have worked, too, if only there had been enough coppers, say, 3 per citizen. Amazingly, quite a few weapons were handed in. The flaw, though, was one that had somehow managed to escape Swing, and it was this. Criminals don't obey the law. It's more or less a requirement for the job. They had no particular interest in making the streets safer for anyone except themselves. And they couldn't believe what was happening. It was like Hog's Watch every day. Some citizens took the not unreasonable view that something had gone a bit askew if only naughty people were carrying arms, and they got arrested in large numbers. The average copper, when he's been kicked in the nadgers once too often and has reason to believe that his bosses don't much care, has an understandable tendency to prefer to arrest those people who won't instantly try to stab him, especially if they act a bit snotty and wear more expensive clothes than he personally can afford. The rate of arrests shot right up, and Swing had been very pleased about that. Admittedly, most of the arrests had been for possessing weaponry after dark, but quite a few had been for assaults on the watch by irate citizens. That was assault on a city official, a very heinous and despicable crime, and, as such, far more important than all those thefts that were going on everywhere. It wasn't that the city was lawless. It had plenty of laws. It just didn't offer many opportunities not to break them. Swing didn't seem to have grasped the idea that the system was supposed to take criminals and, in some rough-and-ready fashion, force them into becoming honest men. Instead, he'd taken honest men and turned them into criminals, and the watch, by and large, into just another gang. And then, just when the whole wretched stew was thickening, he'd invented craniometrics. Bad coppers had always had their ways of finding out if someone was guilty. Back in the old days, now, these included thumbscrews, hammers, small pointed bits of wood, and of course the common desk drawer, always a boon to the copper in a hurry. Swing didn't need any of this. He could tell if you were guilty by looking at your eyebrows. He measured people. He used calipers and a steel ruler, and he quietly wrote down the measurements and did some sums, such as dividing the length of the nose by the circumference of the head and multiplying it by the width of the space between the eyes. And on such figures he could infallibly tell you that you were devious, untrustworthy, and congenitally criminal. After you had spent the next 20 minutes in the company of his staff and their less sophisticated tools of inquiry, he would amazingly be proved right. Everyone was guilty of something. Vimes knew that. Every copper knew it. That was how you maintained your authority. Everyone, talking to a copper, was secretly afraid you could see their guilty secret written on their forehead. You couldn't, of course. But neither were you supposed to drag someone off the street and smash their fingers with a hammer until he told you what it was. Swing would probably have ended up face down in some alley somewhere if it wasn't for the fact that Winder had found him a useful tool. No one could sniff out conspiracies like Swing, and so he'd ended up running the unmentionables, most of whom made Sergeant Knock look like Good Copper of the Month. Vimes had always wondered how the man had kept control, but maybe it was because the thugs recognised, in some animal way, a mind which had arrived at thuggery by the long route, and was capable of devising, in the name of reason, the kind of atrocities that unreason could only dream of. It wasn't easy living in the past. You couldn't whack someone for what they were going to do, or what the world was going to find out later. You couldn't warn people either. You didn't know what would change the future, but if he understood things right, history tended to spring back into shape. All you could change was the bits around the edges, the fine details. There was nothing he could do about the big stuff. The lilac was still going to bloom. The revolution was going to happen. Well, a kind of revolution. That wasn't really the word for what it was. There was the People's Republic of Treacle Mine Road, truth, justice, freedom, reasonably priced love, and a hard-boiled egg. That would live for all of a few hours, a strange candle that burned too briefly and died like a firework. And there was the scouring of the House of Pain and the... Anyway, you did the job that was in front of you, like unimaginative coppers always did. He got up around 1 in the afternoon. Lorne was closeted in his surgery doing something that involved some serious whimpering on the part of something else. Vimes knocked on the door. After a moment it was opened a fraction. Dr. Lorne was wearing a face mask and holding a very long pair of tweezers in his hand. "Yes?" "I'm going out," said Vimes. "Trouble?" "Not too bad. Slidey Harris was unlucky at cards last night. That's all. Played the ace of hearts." "That's an unlucky card?" "It is if Big Tony knows he didn't deal it to you. But I'll soon have it removed. If you're going to injure anyone tonight, can you do it before I go to bed? Thank you." Lorne shut the door. Vimes nodded at the woodwork and went out to stretch his legs and get some lunch. It was waiting for him on a tray around the neck of a man. Quite a young man now, but there was something about the expression as of a rat who was expecting cheese right around the next corner, and had been expecting cheese around the last corner too, and the corner before that. And, although the world had turned out so far to be full of corners, yet completely innocent of any cheese at all, was nevertheless quite certain that, just around the corner, cheese awaited. Vimes stared. But why should he be surprised? As long ago as he could remember, there was always someone selling highly suspicious chemically reclaimed pork products in this town. The seller was very familiar, just younger. His expression lit up at the sight of an unfamiliar face. The seller liked to meet people who hadn't yet bought one of his pies. "Ah, Sergeant! Hey, what's the little crown mean?" "Sergeant at Arms," said Vimes. "That's like Sergeant with all the trimmings." "Well, Sergeant, could I interest you in a very special sausage in a bun? Guaranteed no rat." 100% organic. All pork shaved before mixing. Why not? Thought Vimes. And his stomach, liver, kidneys, and lengths of intestine all supplied reasons, but he fumbled in his pocket for some change anyway. How much, Mr. Vimes remembered in time and made a show of looking at the name on the front of the tray. Dibbler? 4p, Sergeant. And that's cutting your own throat, eh? Said Vimes jovially. Pardon? Said Dibbler, looking puzzled. I said, a price like that's cutting your own throat, eh? Cutting my own throat? Said Vimes desperately. Oh. Dibbler thought about this. Right. Yeah, it is. You never said it through a word. So you'll have one then. I notice it says on your tray, Dibbler Enterprises Est, said Vimes. Shouldn't it say when you were established? Should it? Dibbler looked down at his tray. How long you been going? Said Vimes, selecting a pie. Well, let's see, what year is this? Dancing Dog, I think. Since Tuesday, then, said Dibbler. His face brightened. But this is only the start, mister. This is just to get a stake together. In a year or two I'm going to be a big man in this town. I believe you, said Vimes. I really do. Dibbler looked down at his tray again as Vimes strolled off. Cutting my own throat. Cutting my own throat, he mumbled to himself, and seemed to like the sound of it. But then he focused more clearly on the tray and his face went pale. Sergeant, he shouted, don't eat the pie. Vimes, a few yards away, stopped with the pie halfway to his mouth. What's wrong with it? He said. Silly me. I mean, what's uniquely wrong with it? Nothing. I mean, these are better. Vimes risked another look at the tray. They all looked the same to him. Dibbler's pies quite often looked appetising. Therein lay their one and only charm. I can't see any difference, he said. Yeah, there is, said Dibbler, sweat beading on his forehead. See, the one you got has got a little pattern of pastry pigs on it, and all the others are pastry sausages. I'd hate to think that, I thought you were a pig or anything. So if you'll hand it over, I'll happily give you another one. That one's not the right one. Not that it's the wrong one, but with the pig and everything. Vimes looked into the man's eyes. Dibbler had yet to learn that friendly blankness that 30 years of selling truly organic pies would call into being. While the man stared in horror, he took a large bite out of the pie. It was everything that he had expected, and nothing that he could identify. Yum, he said, and, with some concentration, eyes fixed on the luckless pieman, finished it all. I think it's quite possible no one else makes pies like you do, Mr. Dibbler, he said, licking his fingers in case he might want to shake hands with someone later on. You ate it all? Said Dibbler. Was that wrong? Said Vimes. And now relief rose off the man like smoke off a greenwood fire. What? No, that's fine. Jolly good. Want another one to help it down, half price. No, one is more than enough, said Vimes, backing away. You finished every bit? Said Dibbler. That was right, wasn't it? Said Vimes. Oh, yeah, sure, yeah, obviously. Got to be going, said Vimes, moving on down the lane. I'll look forward to seeing you again when I've got less appetite. He waited until he was well out of sight before taking a few random turns in the network of alleys. Then he stepped into the shadow of a deep doorway and felt in his mouth for the piece of pie that had seemed curiously unchewable even by pie standards. Usually, if you found something more than usually hard or crunchy in one of Dibbler's famous pork pies, the trick was to either swallow it and hope for the best, or spit it out with your eyes closed. But Vimes felt around between gum and cheek and fished out a folded piece of paper, stained with unknowable juices. He unfolded it. In smudged pencil, but still decipherable, it read, Morphic Street, 9 o'clock tonight, password swordfish. Swordfish. Every password was swordfish. Whenever anyone tried to think of a word that no one would ever guess, they always chose swordfish. It was just one of those strange quirks of the human mind. That explained the guilt, anyway. A plot. Another damn plot in a city full of plots. Did he need to know about plots? Anyway, he knew about this one, Morphic Street. The famous Morphic Street conspiracy. Ha! He pushed the greasy scrap into a pocket and then hesitated. Someone was being quiet. Overlaid on the distant street noises was a sort of hollow in the sounds, filled by careful breathing, and the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. Quietly, he pulled the blackjack out of his rear pocket. Now, what were the options? He was a copper, and someone was creeping up on him. If they weren't a copper, then they were in the wrong, because he was a copper. If they were a copper too, then they were one of Swing's crew, and therefore in the wrong, because he was a better copper than them, and so were things floating in gutters. And therefore, delivering a swift bucketful of darkness had no obvious downside. On the other hand, thieves, assassins, and Swing's men, by all accounts, did a lot of creeping up on people and were probably pretty good at it, whereas the person tracking him was keeping their back so close to the wall he could hear the scraping. That meant they were probably just a member of the public, with something on their mind, and he was not inclined to add several ounces of lead shot simply for that reason, because he'd like to believe he wasn't that sort of copper. He settled for stepping out into the alley and saying, "Yeah?" A boy stared up at him. It had to be a boy. Nature would not have been so cruel as to do that to a girl. No single feature in itself was more than passably ugly, but the combination was greater than the sum of the parts. There was also the smell. It wasn't bad as such. It just wasn't entirely human. There was something feral about it. Said its pinched-up face. "Look, tell you what, mister. You tell me where you're going, and I'll stop following you. Have we got a deal? Costs you no more than a penny, and that's a special price. Some people pay me a lot more than that to stop following them." Vimes continued to stare. The creature was wearing an oversized evening dress jacket, shiny with grease and greenish with age, and a top hat that must once have been trodden on by a horse. But the bits that were visible between the two were regrettably familiar. "Oh, no," he moaned. "No, no, no." "You're right, mister." "No, no, no. Oh, ye gods, it had to happen, didn't it?" "You want us to go and fetch Mossy, mister?" Vimes pointed an accusing finger. "You're Nobby Nobbs, right?" The urchin backed away. "Might be. So what? Is that a crime?" He turned to run, but Vimes's hand fell heavily on the shoulder. "Some people might say so. You're Nobby Nobbs, son of Maisie Nobbs and Sconner Nobbs." Probably. But I ain't done nothing, mister." Vimes bent down to look into eyes that peered out at the world through a mask of grime. "How about whizzing wipers, snitching tinklers, pulling wobblers, flogging tumblers, and running rumbles?" Nobby's brow creased in genuine puzzlement. "What's pulling wobblers mean?" he said. Vimes gave him a similar look. Street parley had changed a lot in 30 years. "That's stealing trifles, small items, isn't it?" No, mister, that's tottering Neville's," said Nobby, relaxing. "But you ain't doing badly for someone who's new. What's Oil of Angels?" Memory flicked a card. "A bribe," said Vimes. "And a dimber?" said Nobby, grinning. "Easy. Could be a head beggar, could be just a handsome man." "Well done. Bet you don't know how to fleeg a jade, though." Once again, from a dusty recess, a memory unrolled. This one stuck in your mind. "Dear me, do you know what? What a shame in one so young," said Vimes. "That's when you want to sell a broken-down horse and have to make it a bit frisky in front of the punters, and so you take some fresh, raw, hot ginger, lift up its tail, and push the ginger—" "Caw!" said Nobby, suddenly impressed. "Everyone says you're a real quick learner, and that's true enough. You could have been born here." "Why are you following me, Nobby Nobbs?" said Vimes. The urchin held out a grubby hand. Some street language never changes. Vimes pulled out sixpence. It shone in Nobby's palm like a diamond in a chimney sweep's ear. "One of 'em's a lady," he said, and grinned. The hand stayed out. "That was a bloody sixpence I just gave you, kid," Vimes growled. "Yeah, but I got to think of—" Vimes grabbed the lapels of Nobby's greasy coat and lifted him up, and was mildly shocked to realise that there was practically no weight there. Street urchin, he thought. Urchin sounds about right, spiky, slimy, and smelling slightly of rotting seaweed. But there's hundreds of them round here, clawing a living off the very margins, and as I recall, Nobby was one of the sharpest, and as trustworthy as a chocolate hammer. But that's okay, there's ways to deal with that. How much, he said, for you to work for me all the time? I got customers to think of, he began. Yeah, but I'm the one holding you up in one hand, right? Said Vimes. With his oversized boots dangling a foot above the ground, Nobby considered his position. All the time? Right. For something like that, I've got to be looking at her lordship every day. $1, guess again. Half a dollar? Not a chance. $1 a week, and I won't make your life the utter misery which, Nobby, I assure you I can do in so many little ways. Still dangling, Nobby tried to work all this out. So, I'll be, kind of like a copper, right? He said, grinning artfully. Kind of. Number one suspect says it's a good life being a copper because you can pinch stuff without getting nicked. He's got that right, said Vimes. And he says if anyone gives you lip, you can bop 'em one and chuck 'em in the tanty, Nobby went on. I'd like to be a copper one day. Who's number one suspect? That's what our mam calls Sconner, our dad. Payment up front, yeah? Nobby added hopefully. What do you think? Ah, right. No, eh? Correct. But I'll tell you what. He lowered Nobby to the ground. Light as a feather, he thought. You come with me, kid.